This story is titled, When My Golden Sibling Falsely Accused Me, My Parents Believed Every Word and Kicked Me Out, and even years later when they discovered their favorite had lied, I ignored them until they appeared at my doorstep begging for help, which became my perfect opportunity for revenge. Hey Reddit, I'm a 27-year-old guy who's been following this subreddit for quite some time now, but I've never actually shared my own story. Today, I finally decided to break that silence. Fair warning, this is one hell of a ride, so buckle up. This is essentially a story about family drama where, no matter what you do, you're always somehow cast as the bad guy. If you've ever dealt with golden child syndrome in your family, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about. Growing up, it was painfully obvious that my family had a favorite child. My older brother Ethan, who's now 30. He could practically do whatever he wanted, and nobody ever blinked an eye. Me? That's an entirely different story. My parents owned a small hardware store in our town. They had us working there pretty much as soon as we could lift a toolbox. That seemed fair enough, I guess, but it didn't take long for me to see how things really worked in our family business. Ethan always got all the easy tasks. Ringing people up at the register, casually chatting with customers, or hanging out in the back office supposedly doing paperwork. Meanwhile, I was stuck unloading trucks, hauling heavy boxes until my back screamed in pain, and stacking shelves until my arms ached. It was the classic bullshit arrangement that favored him over me in every possible way. If something broke around the store, somehow it was my fault. Money missing from the register? Guess who immediately got blamed? Ethan had a habit of skipping shifts entirely with absolutely zero consequences. He's got a lot going on, my parents would always say, making excuses for him. But if I showed up just 5 minutes late for my shift, I'd immediately hear, "You need to take this job seriously." The double standard was so obvious that it physically hurt to witness it day after day. After a while, I simply stopped expecting any kind of fairness. And outside of work, Ethan wasn't much better. He treated my personal belongings like they were his own property to use whenever he felt like it. I'd regularly walk outside to find my car completely gone, only for Ethan to show up hours later with the gas tank on empty, of course. If I ever called him out on this behavior, he'd just laugh it off. "Relax, man, it's not a big deal," he'd say, dismissing my frustration entirely. And my parents? Their response was always the same. "He's your brother. Don't be so selfish." Every damn time, they took his side without hesitation. It wasn't just small stuff either. One time, I saved up for a brand new power drill, a top-of-the-line Milwaukee that cost me weeks of paychecks. I was so proud of that purchase. Next thing I know, Ethan borrowed it for some side job he was working on without even asking me. When he finally returned it, the drill was completely busted. I confronted him and told him he needed to replace it. He just shrugged his shoulders and said, "It still works, doesn't it?" It barely functioned, but that didn't matter to him. And of course, my parents backed him up as usual. "It was an accident. Don't make a big deal out of it," they said, completely dismissing how hard I had worked to afford that drill in the first place. After that incident, I started locking all my tools in my truck. It was the only way to keep his hands off my stuff. The worst part was how everyone acted like Ethan could do no wrong. If he screwed up, there was always some convenient excuse ready to go. Forgot to lock up the store one night? He must have been tired. Short on cash from the till? Maybe the register was off. Meanwhile, if I so much as looked at the clock during a slow shift, I'd hear, "You need to stay focused." It was a maddening double standard that I had to deal with every single day. Somewhere along the line, Ethan's screw-ups started getting far worse. He got into gambling big time, sports bets, poker hands, and God knows what else. It didn't take long before he started dipping into the hardware store cash, using it to cover his mounting losses. I found out when I noticed the till coming up short more and more often. I tried to mention it to Dad once, thinking maybe it was just an honest mistake that needed attention. He just waved it off dismissively. "Ethan's going through a rough patch. Don't make a big deal out of it," he said, using his standard line of defense. Rough patch or not, the missing cash kept adding up. Meanwhile, I had to cover the difference more than once, taking it out of my own paycheck just to avoid another lecture about responsibility. Ethan never got so much as a slap on the wrist. Mom kept saying, "He's under a lot of stress. He needs our support." I guess their idea of support included turning a blind eye while he treated the store register like his personal ATM. Things finally boiled over one night after we closed the store. Ethan had dipped out early again, leaving me to unload a shipment by myself. And this wasn't just a few boxes. We're talking pallets of lumber, bags of cement mix, and enough hardware to stock the shelves for a month. By the time I finally locked up, my back felt absolutely destroyed from all the heavy lifting. I drove home, exhausted and irritated, only to find Ethan in the garage digging through Dad's toolbox drawers, the ones where Dad sometimes stashed extra cash. I didn't need to guess what he was looking for. Ethan had developed a habit of borrowing money whenever his gambling debt started piling up. "Looking for tools or cash this time?" I said, startling him. He didn't even look up from the drawer he was rummaging through. "Mind your business," he muttered dismissively. "Yeah? The register's been short all week. You think no one noticed?" I stepped closer, my patience wearing thinner by the second. "I'll pay it back like last time," he replied, still not making eye contact. I took another step toward him. "How much this time? Poker? Football bets?" The frustration that had been building for years was reaching its breaking point. He finally turned to face me, stepping closer too, like he wanted to square up. "At least I'm not busting my ass hauling boxes for minimum wage," he sneered. "Maybe if you took a few risks, you wouldn't be stuck scraping by." Before I could even think, I shoved him hard. We clashed aggressively, scuffling and knocking over a stack of paint cans. The noise we made was enough to bring Mom and Dad running into the garage. They burst in just as I shoved Ethan against the wall. Mom yelled for us to stop, and Dad stepped between us, looking straight at me like I was the one who'd screwed up. I tried to explain about the missing money, but Dad cut me off before I could get the words out. He said he didn't want to hear it. Said Ethan was under a lot of stress, and that I needed to stop making things harder for him. It was the same excuse as always. I couldn't believe they were still defending him, even when he was literally stealing from the family business. I walked out before I said something I'd regret. After that night, I knew I needed to get out of that house. I kept my head down, worked my shifts, and tried to save enough cash to get my own place. I wasn't looking for handouts. I just wanted out. But of course, things didn't go the way I planned. Around that time, my grandparents started having health problems. Grandpa's arthritis made it tough for him to get around, and Grandma needed medication that wasn't cheap. They'd always been good to me and never picked sides like my parents did. To help cover their expenses, they'd stashed about $12,000 in a safe kept at their house. Not exactly the smartest financial move, but they didn't trust banks after getting burned during some financial mess years back. Ethan suddenly started visiting them more often, playing the caring grandson routine. I figured he was just buttering them up. He had a habit of using people when he needed something. Meanwhile, I barely had time to visit between shifts at the store and side jobs I'd picked up to boost my savings. I was working every minute I could to build up enough money to move out. Then one weekend, the money vanished. There were no break-ins, no forced entry. It was just gone. The whole family went into panic mode. Grandpa was tearing the house apart, convinced the safe had to be somewhere else. Grandma could barely speak. She was so upset. Everyone started tossing around theories about what might have happened, but it didn't take long before fingers started pointing in a predictable direction. I was unloading a shipment at the store when my phone buzzed with a message from Dad. "Get to the house now." He hung up without any explanation. By the time I got to my grandparents' house, the living room felt like an interrogation room. My parents sat stiffly on the couch with Grandma and Grandpa next to them, their faces drawn with worry. And then there was Ethan, standing with his arms crossed like he already knew exactly how this whole scenario was going to play out. Dad didn't waste any time getting to the point. $12,000 is missing, he said bluntly. Your grandparents need that money for their medical bills. Tell us what happened. I don't know what to tell you, I replied honestly. I didn't take anything. Mom shot me a look like I'd just spit on the carpet, her disbelief evident. That's when Ethan spoke up, claiming he saw me near the safe the last time I visited. He mentioned that I'd been struggling with rent lately, suggesting maybe I got desperate. Just tell the truth so we can move on, he said, with a calmness that made my blood boil. I glanced at Ethan, who just stood there with that same blank expression, the one he always had when he knew he was about to get away with something. I couldn't believe what was happening. The same person who had been stealing from the store register was now accusing me of taking my grandparents' money. I told them firmly that I would never steal from Grandma and Grandpa, reminding them that I don't even visit that often because I'm always working. Dad, not believing a word I said, responded, "Then prove it. Pay the money back. Until you do, don't bother coming around." They couldn't be serious. How did they expect me to prove something I didn't even do? They really believed I'd steal from my own grandparents without any actual evidence. "I don't have 12 grand lying around," I said, stating the obvious. "Then figure it out," Dad shot back, his tone final. My grandparents remained silent throughout this exchange. Nobody said a word in my defense. I waited, hoping someone would step up and at least question this ridiculous accusation. But the silence just dragged on painfully until Dad nodded toward the door. "Go pack your stuff," he said. I stood there for a second, half expecting anyone, to stop me or speak up. Nobody did. I turned and walked out to my car, feeling numb and betrayed. By the time I got back to my parents' house to collect my belongings, they'd already tossed my stuff into the trunk of my car. Bags of clothes, a few tools, and whatever else they thought was mine were haphazardly thrown together like garbage. Ethan showed up just as I was about to drive off. He stood on the porch watching me, like he was waiting to see me crack under the pressure. For a second, I thought about calling him out, telling everyone what kind of person he really was. But what was the point? They'd already made up their minds. Ethan had pointed his finger at me, and everyone had believed him without question. That moment was enough for me to understand with perfect clarity. There was no place for me in this family anymore. I drove off without looking back. The next few weeks were rough. Getting kicked out wasn't some dramatic, life-changing moment like in the movies. It was more like getting shoved into a pit and realizing no one was coming to pull you out. You either climb out yourself or you stay down there forever. The apartment I moved into wasn't much to look at. Bare walls, secondhand furniture, and a refrigerator that sounded like it was on its last legs. Rent ate up most of my paycheck from the construction job I'd picked up after leaving the store. I didn't have much money left after paying bills, so dinner was usually instant noodles or whatever happened to be on sale at the grocery store that week. The hardest part wasn't the work, though. It was the silence. My parents didn't just cut me off financially. They made sure everyone else in the family did too. Calls went straight to voicemail. Texts got ignored. The invites to family gatherings stopped coming. Even friends I'd known for years started pulling away, like they didn't want to get caught in the middle of family drama. I stopped reaching out after a while. I figured if they didn't want me around, I wasn't going to beg for their attention. If they thought I couldn't make it without them, they were about to find out how wrong they were. I picked up extra shifts wherever I could, fixing decks, patching roofs, remodeling kitchens. The more jobs I took, the more skills I learned. Carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. I soaked up every bit of knowledge I could get my hands on. YouTube tutorials, construction manuals, watching the older guys on site. Whatever it took to improve my skills and increase my value. The pay wasn't great at first, but it kept me moving forward. Every busted knuckle and sleepless night felt like a step toward paying off a debt I owed to myself, and I was determined to settle that account in full. Nights were the worst. After working all day, I'd come home too tired to do much besides collapse on the couch. But I kept grinding. Every extra shift, every side gig, every dollar saved. It all added up little by little. My cousin Kevin was the only one from the family who stuck around. He never bought into the whole thief story, probably because he knew what kind of guy Ethan really was. Kevin worked construction too, so he helped me land a few bigger jobs. When I needed an extra set of hands on weekends, he was the first one to show up, ready to work. Having someone in my corner helped, but I wasn't leaning on anyone. Every dollar I made went straight back into upgrading my tools and truck. No flashy spending, no wasted cash. It wasn't long before I had to make a choice. Stick with my construction crew job or go all in on my own thing. I walked into the site office one morning, handed in my notice, and drove home knowing there was no backup plan. No steady paycheck, just me and whatever jobs I could land on my own. But that was the point. No safety net, no excuses. Either I made it work, or I didn't. Going solo wasn't easy. Roofing in the summer heat, crawling under houses to fix busted pipes, hauling drywall until my shoulders ached. None of it was fun. But I didn't care. Every job meant more cash, more skills, and more clients spreading my name around town. There was this one job that really stuck with me, the one that really got things rolling. This guy hired me to build a custom deck on his lake house. The job had to be perfect, no shortcuts, no mistakes. I spent 2 weeks measuring, cutting, and building, working late into the evening with only a flashlight when the sun went down. By the time I finished, my hands were raw, and I was running on fumes from exhaustion. But the client was impressed enough to start recommending me to his friends. Turns out he was a real estate investor with properties all over the county. Suddenly, I wasn't just fixing decks. I was remodeling rental properties, flipping houses, and handling renovation contracts that paid more in a month than I used to make in 3. Real estate investors started calling me regularly, and that's when things really took off. With more jobs coming in than I could handle alone, I needed help. I hired a couple of guys I trusted. No slackers, no complainers, just solid workers who knew what they were doing. We tackled everything from bathroom remodels to full-scale renovations. I made sure we did every job right the first time. No cutting corners, no rushing to finish early. I understood that reputation mattered more than price, and I wasn't about to screw that up by delivering subpar work. The money started rolling in faster than I could spend it. The first thing I did was upgrade my truck. Nothing flashy, just a solid workhorse with enough space for tools and materials. I bought better equipment too. Table saws, power drills, everything I needed to handle bigger jobs. I even picked up a trailer to haul lumber and debris, saving me time and money on every project. Every dollar that didn't go into tools or gas went straight into savings. No fancy dinners, no vacations, just slow, steady progress toward financial security. I was too busy working to spend money anyway. 7 days a week, sun up to sundown, I was either on a job site or lining up the next gig. I didn't have much of a social life, but that wasn't my priority at this point. Meanwhile, Ethan was still circling the drain. His gambling problem wasn't a secret anymore. Word around town was that he owed money to half the guys he used to hang out with. A few of them even showed up at the hardware store looking for him, but my parents covered for him, same as always. They were still convinced he'd get back on track any day now. It didn't bother me. I had bigger things to worry about. A year into running my own business, I had more work than I could handle. I started turning down small jobs just to keep up with the bigger ones. Home remodels, commercial renovations, even a few custom builds. These were the kind of projects that paid enough to keep my crews busy for weeks at a time. I bought a second truck, hired more guys, and expanded my crew to 3 teams. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. 3 crews running jobs across the state, pulling in serious money each year, and living in a house I owned outright, all built from nothing, no handouts, no shortcuts. Success didn't happen overnight, but in just a couple of years, I wasn't just remodeling houses. I was handling multi-unit properties, office buildings, and retail spaces. Projects that my former boss at the construction company wouldn't have even dreamed of landing. But my success didn't mean I forgot where I came from. Every time I drove past my parents' hardware store, I remembered the nights I spent unloading trucks while Ethan sat in the back pretending to do paperwork. I remembered the look on his face when I drove away that day. The smirk. The satisfaction of knowing he'd gotten away with it. And every time I thought about slowing down or taking it easy, I remembered that moment and pushed myself even harder. With the money rolling in steadily, I expanded my business fast, bought more trucks, hired more specialists, carpenters, electricians, plumbers. I kept my crews lean, no slackers, no dead weight. If someone couldn't pull their weight or started showing up late, they were gone. Simple as that. I didn't have time to babysit anyone. Every job had to be done right the first time, no exceptions. My cousin Kevin stayed in the picture, helping with networking and landing clients. The guy knew everyone. Property managers, real estate developers, even a few city officials. Thanks to him, I scored a contract with a developer building luxury condos downtown. That one job alone pulled in more money than my entire first year of side gigs combined. After a few years of running my own successful business, I didn't think much about my family anymore. My days were packed with renovation projects, managing crews, and chasing deadlines. I barely had time to sleep, let alone dwell on what had happened with my family. But every now and then, Kevin would fill me in on what was going on with them. Turns out Ethan had tried to start his own handyman business at one point. He probably figured if I could do it, so could he. But surprise, surprise, it didn't last long. Poor management, missed deadlines, and a reputation for cutting corners killed any chance he had of making it work. Clients started leaving bad reviews, word spread quickly, and soon nobody wanted to hire him. The funny thing was, I didn't feel much of anything about his failure. No satisfaction, no sense of justice, just indifference. I was too focused on my own life to care about his problems. But karma has a way of showing up when you least expect it. It all came to a head one summer during a family get-together. I wasn't there, hadn't been invited to a family event in years, but Kevin filled me in on the details later. Apparently, Ethan showed up already looking rough. He was nursing the kind of stress that comes from owing money to people who don't easily forget debts. But true to form, he couldn't keep his mouth shut. After a few too many drinks, he started bragging about his supposed big wins and how he was going to turn things around soon. And then he slipped up. Maybe he thought no one would catch it, or maybe he was just too far gone to care. But somewhere in the middle of his rambling, he let it slip that he'd borrowed the money from Grandpa's safe to cover a gambling debt. He claimed he thought he'd win big and put it back before anyone noticed, only the winning part never happened. Grandpa didn't yell or make a scene. He just stood up, looked Ethan square in the eye, and told him to leave. No more handouts, no more second chances. Grandma didn't say anything at all. She just sat there with her hands folded in her lap, looking like she'd already known the truth all along. Ethan tried to talk his way out of it, saying he'd pay them back once he got back on his feet. Nobody bought it. My parents, true to form, tried to smooth things over. "He's going through a rough patch," they said. "We just need to support him. He's just drunk and babbling random stuff." But Grandpa wasn't having any of it. "Don't make excuses for him," he said firmly. "He stole from us and threw the blame on his brother. That's the kind of man he is." That was the end of it. Ethan left, slamming the door behind him. Nobody followed him out. When Kevin called to tell me what had happened, I didn't say much. I just let the news settle in. I wasn't surprised. I'd suspected Ethan from the start. But hearing the truth out loud still hit differently. Not because it changed anything. My family had already made their choice years ago. But there was a part of me that felt satisfied, knowing the truth had finally come out. I asked Kevin how the rest of the family reacted. Turns out most of them just wanted to move on. Nobody talked about how they'd all stood by while I got kicked out. Nobody brought up the fact that they'd cut me off without a second thought. It was like they all just wanted to pretend none of it had ever happened. The only one who seemed to care was Grandpa. A few days after the blow-up, he called me for the first time in years. I almost didn't pick up, thinking maybe he wanted to smooth things over like nothing had happened. He didn't say much at first, just asked how I was doing, if business was going well. I could hear the strain in his voice like he wasn't sure what to say. Finally, after a long pause, he said, "I should have spoken up that day. I knew you didn't take that money, but I guess I didn't know how to go against the rest of the family." I didn't say much in response. I just told him I was doing fine. Maybe if he'd called years earlier, things would have been different. But by then, I'd already built a life without them. I didn't need their apologies. After that conversation, I didn't hear from him again. Kevin told me later that Grandpa stopped coming to family gatherings as often. I guess the whole thing hit him harder than anyone realized. As for Ethan, things didn't get any better. Last I heard, he was still bouncing between jobs, trying to scrape together enough money to keep the lights on. Nobody wanted to hire a guy with a reputation for stealing from his own family. Even the people he used to gamble with stopped loaning him money. Word gets around fast in a small town. My parents kept their distance too. Whether it was guilt or pride, I didn't know. But they never reached out. Not until the day they needed something from me. A few months after the big news at the family gathering, life had settled into a rhythm. Business was still booming. Between managing contracts, overseeing job sites, and keeping up with payroll, there wasn't much time for anything else. Not that I minded. The grind was the only thing that kept me grounded. Then one evening, my phone buzzed while I was going over invoices at my kitchen table. I froze when I saw the caller ID. It was my dad. I hadn't heard from him in years. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "Hey, it's been a while," he said, sounding like he wasn't sure how to start the conversation. "Yeah, it has. What's up?" I kept my tone flat. There was no point in pretending this was just a social call. After a few minutes of him awkwardly pretending to care about my life and half-heartedly apologizing for tossing me aside years ago, he finally got to the real reason for his call. "Well, the store's hit a rough patch," he admitted. "Some unexpected expenses came up, and we're having trouble keeping up with the bills. I heard you've been doing well. Thought maybe you could help out, maybe invest a little to keep things running." The audacity of it left me staring at the wall in disbelief. The same guy who had kicked me out without proof, who had believed the worst about me without question, was now asking for my money. Part of me wanted to laugh and hang up without another word. But instead, I just said, "I'll think about it," and ended the call. That's when a brilliant idea came to me. I called them back a week later, and we agreed to meet up to discuss the situation. We met at a diner near the old neighborhood. Mom and Dad sat across from me, looking worn down and desperate. There were no genuine apologies, no acknowledgement of the past, just awkward small talk until Dad finally got to the point. "The bank's calling in our loans," he said, looking down at his coffee cup. If we can't come up with the money, we'll lose the store. We need an investor, someone we can trust. I let the silence stretch out just long enough to make them squirm uncomfortably in their seats. Then I laid out my terms. I'd pay off their debts, but I wanted 51% ownership, majority control, full authority to hire, fire, and make any decisions I saw fit. No exceptions. They were stunned at first, of course. They had expected me to help them under no conditions, to just throw my money at them without asking for anything in return. They wanted to argue, but I cut them off before they could start. Take it or leave it, I said firmly. That's the only way I'd consider helping you. But if you leave it, the store's done for. For a moment, neither of them said anything. I could see the internal struggle in their eyes, their egos clashing with the harsh reality of their situation. But ego doesn't pay the bills. After a long pause, Dad nodded reluctantly. All right, he said, his voice strained. They signed the papers right there in the diner. Just like that, I became the majority owner of the business they had once kicked me out of. Taking control of the store didn't feel like some big victory at first. It was just another job, another challenge to tackle. But as the weeks went by, the reality of it started to sink in. I wasn't just running the place, I owned it. The same building where I used to haul boxes and mop floors was now mine. Every decision, every paycheck, every dollar of profit, it all came through me. The first thing I did was go through the books. The place was an absolute mess, missed payments, bad inventory orders, and deals that should have never been signed in the first place. I spent the next week tearing through every account, cutting unnecessary expenses, and locking down the budget. No more freebies for family, no more favors that cut into profits. Then I moved on to cleaning house. Ethan had to go first, but there were still a few employees who'd gotten too comfortable slacking off. They clocked in late, took long breaks, and acted like they were doing me a favor just by showing up. I gave them a week to shape up. Most of them didn't, so they were gone. No warnings, no second chances. I needed people who understood that this wasn't the same store it used to be. Once the staffing issues were sorted out, I turned my focus to the finances. The books were worse than I had initially expected. Overdue bills, bad supplier contracts, and enough wasted inventory to fill a warehouse. I spent hours going through every account, cutting unnecessary expenses, and renegotiating deals with suppliers. Some of them tried to push back, thinking they could take advantage of the new owner. But I made it crystal clear that those days were over. Either they gave me better terms, or I'd take my business elsewhere. Most of them caved to my demands. The ones who didn't got replaced immediately. With the finances under control, I tackled the inventory next. Half the shelves were stocked with items that nobody ever bought, cheap tools, outdated equipment, and random hardware that had been collecting dust for years. I cleared it all out, slashed prices to move the dead stock, and used the cash to bring in products that customers actually wanted. I added new lines of power tools, high-quality building materials, and specialty items that contractors couldn't find anywhere else in town. The store was starting to transform into something completely different from what it had been under my parents' management. As for Ethan, it was time to give him what he deserved. He was the first person I dealt with when taking over. I didn't waste any time or mince words. I walked into his office Monday morning and dropped the termination letter on his desk. "Your last paycheck," I told him flatly. "You're done here, You can't do this," he shouted, his face turning red with anger. I cut him off mid-sentence. "Yes, I can, and I just did." Security walked him out while the staff watched. Nobody defended him. Nobody even looked surprised. With Ethan gone, I turned my focus entirely to revitalizing the business. Sales picked up almost immediately. Contractors started coming in more often because they knew we had what they needed, and homeowners appreciated the better selection and cleaner store. I made sure the place looked professional, organized shelves, clear signage, and a checkout process that didn't take half an hour to complete. I even invested in a new point-of-sale system to speed things up and keep better track of inventory. Within 6 months, the store was back in the black. Sales were up, expenses were down, and profits had increased by nearly 20%. By the end of the year, the store was pulling in more revenue than it had in the last 5 years combined. Suppliers started offering me better deals, and local contractors began recommending us to their crews. Word spread fast that the hardware store was under new management, and that this time, things were being done right. And my parents? They stayed on as employees. No special treatment, no extra perks. They clocked in and out like everyone else. If they didn't like the new arrangement, they knew where the door was. I made it clear from day one that this wasn't a family favor. This was a business decision, pure and simple. For the first time in years, I didn't feel anger or resentment toward them, just a sense of closure. I'd built my success without them, and now every time they walked into that store, they'd know exactly who they answered to. Meanwhile, Ethan's downward spiral didn't slow down. With no job, no money, and no more handouts from mom and dad, he was in a tough spot. Last I heard, he was working part-time at a warehouse across town, barely scraping by. Nobody wanted to hire a guy with his reputation, not after the gambling debts, missed shifts, and burned bridges became common knowledge. Even the people he used to hang out with had stopped returning his calls. He'd used up all his favors and then some. Well, I couldn't say I felt bad about his situation. He'd made his own bed. Mom and Dad never said much about Ethan, but I could tell it weighed on them. They never asked me to help him, though, not after everything that had happened. Maybe they finally knew better than to push their luck with me. It didn't matter anyway. Ethan had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. I wasn't about to waste my time trying to save someone who had once tried to ruin my life without a second thought. As for the rest of the family, most of them kept their distance. A few relatives started showing up at the store again once they heard I was running it, but the conversations were always short and awkward. Nobody brought up what had happened with the money, and nobody apologized for turning their backs on me. It was like they all wanted to pretend it had never happened. Fine by me, I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. But Grandpa was different. He stopped by one afternoon unannounced. I was in the middle of unloading a shipment when I saw him standing near the entrance. For a second, I thought about pretending I hadn't seen him, but he came over before I could decide. He stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Place looks good." "Thanks," I replied simply, continuing with my work. Then he continued, his voice quieter. "I should have spoken up that day. I knew you didn't take that money, but well, I think I didn't have the courage to stand against the crowd." I just nodded, not wanting to make this easier for him. Save it. I'm doing good after all. Maybe if he'd said those words years ago, things would have been different. But standing there, surrounded by the business I'd built with my own two hands, I realized I didn't need his apology. I'd already proven everything I needed to prove. After a few more minutes of small talk, he left. I never saw him again after that. Kevin told me later that Grandpa had stopped going to family gatherings and kept to himself for the most part. Maybe the guilt was too much, or maybe he just got tired of the drama. Either way, I didn't care anymore. By the time the next year rolled around, the store was running like a well-oiled machine. Profits were steady, and the customers knew they could count on us. I kept building my construction business, running 3 solid crews while managing the store on the side. These days, I don't think much about the past. Life is better than ever, built on my own terms, and that feels damn good. I didn't expect this story to blow up like this when I started writing, but I appreciate all the support from you guys who read through it all. To those asking about Ethan in the comments, no, I haven't heard from him in a while. Last I heard, he's still bouncing between jobs. Some people never change, no matter how many chances they get, or how hard life slaps them in the face with reality. As for my parents, they've learned to keep things professional at the store, but that's about it. We're not having family dinners or anything like that. The relationship is strictly business now, and I prefer it that way. Too much has happened to go back to playing happy family. Life is good now. I'm just focused on what comes next, expanding both businesses, maybe looking into commercial real estate. I'm building something that's entirely mine, something I can be proud of. No regrets about how it all turned out. Sometimes I think about how differently things could have gone if I had just accepted my role as the family scapegoat. If I had just kept my head down and let Ethan continue being the golden child. But standing up for myself and walking away was the best decision I ever made, even if it didn't feel like it at the time. I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even or proving someone wrong. It's just living well and succeeding on your own terms. When you build something from nothing, when you know that every dollar you've earned and every success you've had came from your own hard work and determination, there's no better feeling in the world. My story isn't particularly unique. I'm sure many of you have dealt with similar family dynamics, the golden child, the scapegoat, the enablers who make excuses. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from all this, it's that you don't have to accept the role that others try to force on you. You can walk away, build your own life, and find success without them. It might be hard, it might be lonely at times, but it's worth it in the end. Trust me on that. Thanks again for all the supportive comments and messages. It feels good to finally share this story after keeping it bottled up for so long. Maybe someday I'll post an update if anything significant changes. But for now, I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing, working hard and building the life I want, not the one someone else chose for me.